afternoon. This is Jenny Pell with the Climate Reality Show, and I'm here for the premiere podcast where we meet people all over the world that are working on solutions every day to usher us into the climate era. We're going to meet people involved with regenerative agriculture, bioremediation through mycology, appropriate technology designers, and today we're meeting with Andrew Millison from Oregon State University. He's on his way to Senegal in a few days to where he's working on a really large-scale Great Green Wall project. We're going to learn about that today. Andrew probably has the most robust teaching platform in the world. He's run thousands of people through his program at Oregon State University. And then, of course, those students go on to integrate that into their lives and their businesses and their homes and their neighborhoods. So, Andrew, I'm so excited that you're my first guest. And I haven't seen you in ages. I haven't seen you since before COVID.
I know. I'm so excited that you asked me, Jenny, and you're just one of my favorite people in the world. So I just like having the time to actually just chat with you, really.
Right, yeah, right on. Well, I want to put a little context to this show because we've been gearing up to, put this podcast together, the Climate Reality Show, for some time through Growers Magazine, which is our online digital platform for all kinds of things, appropriate technologies, regenerative agriculture, people that are growing food for their neighborhoods. Like we're looking at, large and, small scale solutions for adapting and adopting to the climate change reality as it unfolds around us. We had the fires here on Maui that basically obliterated the city town of Lahaina. It's hard times here. It's a result of corporate chem ag, land greed, mistakes, fire hazard, and invasive species. Like the list of ills that have brought this tragedy to our islands is long. It's a long list. And what phoenix is going to rise from these ashes? Myself, I've been aware of and believing in climate change for 40 years, and so have you. So that's the sort of the preamble to what we're going to talk about, but I really want to move quickly into hope and solutions and how to get involved and what it means to join up with this really vital movement around the world.
Yeah, and I mean it's really wild when I talked to you just a little bit ago after the fires, and just to hear the on the ground report from you was I started crying when we were talking, honestly, just like on the phone. Just when we think about the things that are stacked up right now, you mentioned some. It's like where the overlap of capitalism gone wild, climate craziness, mismanagement of land, and all of the sort of other things that come along with those, and other topics. I mean, it's just the truth is we face a massive challenge right now, a scary challenge right now. And I really encourage people not to huddle in fetal position here and but hey, well, what are you going to tell yourself that you did at the end when
Right, and what can you do? I mean, the results that we're looking at around the world, right? It's the interruption of the soil food web. It's the destruction of the flowing and meanders of the watersheds with all of the fertility and all of the biodiversity that lives in that. And in Hawaii, of course, it's the destruction of the watershed is also the destruction of the lo'i. It's also the destruction of the key food sources that malama that watershed all the way up, right? Which of course then that sweet water, filtered water, comes down to the edge, and that brackish water, that's where the fish that's where the fish fry are raised, in the fish ponds in some parts of Hawaii. So we're lucky in Hawaii. We still have a relatively intact lineage of Hawaiians who know how to malama the aina. They know how to take care of the land. They know how to take care of the water. And what we're really excited about supporting is letting the indigenous voices lead. And I know that you're working on projects around the world that have that same opportunity to give voice to the people that know the most, that are from there, right? So tell us what's going on in Africa. I'm so excited about the Great Green Wall project.
Yeah. And so I just want to say, I mean, primarily, right, at this point in my work, I am like an amplifier. So I am finding these different, really incredible, large scale, inspirational land restoration, watershed restoration, climate resilience, climate change mitigation projects. And I'm basically, like, when we say I'm working on these projects, I'm not necessarily working on these projects. I'm going and seeing the work that's being done on these projects. And then I'm basically telling the story in a sense. So, I mean, recently I went to India this winter and I've been beginning to put out a lot of the work there that I documented. And then I had the opportunity to go to Senegal. It was very short term, just got asked just a little while ago with an organization that's basically working on the Great Green Wall of Africa project. The Sahara Desert spans the entire northern expanse of Africa, of the continent of Africa. And the Sahara Desert, due to deforestation, basically has been making a steady march southward. And so this is a collaboration. The UN's involved. It's 22 countries planting a belt of trees that spans 22 countries, the entire width of Africa, to basically halt the southern expansion of the Sahara Desert. So that's the Great Green Wall of Africa. And I was asked by a German organization who called Planet Wild, they basically have people give them like a subscription each month, and then they pick, they vet, and then they pick a project, and then they do some action. So they're planting 40,000 trees, or they are funding the planting of 40,000 trees that we're going to go visit that project. That organization's called Trees for the Future. That's actually on the ground, and they've planted 300 million trees since their inception. But their goal is to plant 1 billion trees by, I don't know what it is, maybe 2030. It's, pretty ambitious. But the cool thing about this particular project is that they are planting trees in what we think of as like a permaculture forest garden pattern. So they're doing diverse plantings, they're doing multi-story plantings, they're doing hedgerows, windbreaks. It's very much, as opposed to a monoculture tree plantation, it's on the farm, diverse, food producing, with all of the wonderful plant guild associations with nitrogen fixers and creeping vines, and so in part go ahead.
But it's also part of those new emerging forests that have that, forest garden, healing forest, medicinal forest, all the overstory, understory lines, all that stuff. It also very quickly impacts the small water cycle, right? So the generation of movement of water through the system, that must be fascinating to document.
Yeah, and I'm always very interested when I go to a place to see what the land division pattern is and how does it relate to the watershed. So a lot of my work in India is showing how their village scale projects are also watershed scale projects, because the village boundaries are the watershed boundaries. So that's one of the things that I'm looking at when we're going to these farms and looking. I mean, we're basically looking at individual farms, individual plots of like a quarter to a half acre is the average size sort of garden or farm that people are farming there. So I'm very curious to see how those different plots are arranged in relation to water flow. Is that something that's considered? Like, this is kind of some of the reasons why I'm coming in, is to add my viewpoint. I mean, that's why this organization's bringing me, to be in their video and also to document their work, but to give my, my evaluation of the project from the permaculture perspective. So I'm really interested to see how they actually are working with water flow or not in their tree planting.
Yeah, so you're bringing your you're bringing your wisdom, you're bringing your knowledge. I mean, you have so much, you've seen so much and worked on so many implementation projects and designs.
Yeah.
Like, people used to ask me, they're like, "How do you get all these really cool design projects?" I'm like, "Well, there's just not that many people that that do design work at this level." And I would say that that's a challenge and an invitation to the audience. Like, we need more designers of all kinds. We need people to be designing appropriate technology solutions. We need people designing small scale watershed solutions, large scale, you name it, even like swales outside cities.
Yeah.
What we're facing around the world too, and Hawaii is no exception. Like, we're having it really bad over here. But one of the climate reality things is we're getting these extended periods of drought where everything's just a tinderbox. And then we get rain events. So we get so much rain comes down, and that huge amount of erosion, of course, washes through these very ill watersheds, and that washes down into the reef or down to the ocean and chokes and suffocates the ocean edge, right? So that's a pattern that we're looking at. And how do we as designers and how do we as people who live on the land find ways to adapt to longer periods of drought and rain events? So we want more and more and more passive water harvesting in a lot of systems. We want more and more roots. We want more and more mycelium in the soil. So it's like, so when you look at that, are you working with like local nursery people? Are you developing templates that we can draw from? I think the template is one of the key things we need in this system right now. It's like the core template for climate resilient agroforestry. And people can overlay their own culture, they can overlay their own plant lists, their own knowledge of the land into that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to get a little bit doomerish for a second here about where I live in the Pacific Northwest. And, luckily it's kind of clouded over right now. And we even have some rain in the forecast here, but it was September 5th, which in 2020 that we had the massive Labor Day firestorms here. That was just, you zoom out and you start looking at these macro weather systems. That was this cold air mass, polar air mass coming down to the center of the country and displacing all of this dry, hot air from the east out to the west. So we had this, counter to the sort of oceanic jet stream flow. And it created this intense wind funnel and just pushed all of these fires down through these canyons, into the valley here. And the fact is, with warm, and we've had a very hot, dry summer here. We just hit 108 not long ago. It's been extremely dry. And, you look at these conditions, and I mean, what people are talking about is basically like the northern retreat of the Douglas fir range, and so, I mean, it becomes the scale of protecting yourself and adapting becomes very vast. I did an interesting podcast interview with Tommy Hazel, some time ago, where they laid out basically the forest, like the forestry techniques that if we were going to get out ahead of this inevitable die-off of a lot of the Doug fir trees and the migration of that range, we would be doing a lot of selective thinning. We would be leaving refugia in the wettest, shadiest microclimates, in the western and southern slopes that are receiving the most heat and are drying out the fastest. We would be doing a lot of thinning. We would start to take species from further south. We might be looking in Northern California. We might be bringing oaks up, and we would be like assisting this transition, because it's going to transition one way or another. Now, hopefully the transition is not massive scale wildfire, right? And hopefully we actually can get our hands in the highest levels really of the government, like the Forest Service, and hopefully people there can start to tune in and we can get out ahead instead of reacting to major wildfires. I mean, that's the hope with putting out all these education, like you said, templates, and really like understanding what is the pattern response to this massive change in the ecosystem.
Right. Well, this is the conversation around our table, which is, what you're doing right now in your community, in your state, in your watershed, in your, your bioregion. Like the things we're doing right now are going to really inform the story of whether or not your tribe not only survives, but thrives into the climate change era. Like we have some really big decisions. And if I were an elected politician, like I would be really concerned about how I was going to feed, cool, heat, transport my people in the waning fossil fuel time. I mean, I read an article this week that said that the global fossil fuel industry is subsidized to the tune of $13 million a minute around the world. And that we all know that the fossil fuel companies, they measure their wealth by the oil that's still in the ground. They haven't even extracted it. They're measuring their wealth by oil that they're planning to burn. So this is insane. Like the level of insanity is huge. And I find myself, wearing really two hats. One is climate resilient agroforestry, and the other one is neighborhood food. So how do we really quickly turn our immediate neighborhoods? Like I live in a subdivision on Maui. So we could grow so much food in this neighborhood, it's insane. And you have a neighborhood food project too. Like tell us about like what's happened just from your hub of activity of permaculture neighborhood food and how that's radiated out through your community.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't even want to take credit because there's so many people in my neighborhood that are like super gardener food people. I think I just live in a place where there's a real concentration of that. I feel like I've had a subtle impact, through bringing lots of students through, having students design projects in various parts of my neighborhood, consulting with a lot of my neighbors. But I just happen to live in a place. Well, I live in, Corvallis is the heart of the valley. So it's a really agriculturally rich place. It's Oregon State University, which is a land grant university. So there's lots of just seed breeders and gardeners and orchardists. And I mean, it's just like I live in like a hotbed of horticulture. So
And Capular live in Corvallis?
yeah,
Mushroom?
right down the block from me. Yeah, the Capulars live here. Yeah.
One of the most amazing seed collection with a new taxonomy, right? Didn't he develop a whole new taxonomy of seeds?
Yeah.
Right.
And so that's all. I mean, their whole seed collection is like 2 stones throws down the road for me. And there's lots of people like that are around here. So, I mean, I feel like I've brought in the permaculture voice and specifically permaculture techniques and the design protocol. I've had a lot of students come through my class. A lot of, at Oregon State University, when I teach on campus, I mean, my students they're not necessarily Corvallis locals, but they're Oregon locals. They're kids whose parents have farms, who have land, who are going to inherit land. Oh yeah, my parents have, a 100-acre vineyard up in Yamhill County. Oh, my parents have 300 acres in Southern Oregon. So it's like, there's this
fourth generation cattle ranching family from Eastern Oregon, right?
I get that. I mean, that's like, that's my students basically. So, in a sense, like Oregon is a place where everybody pretty much recognizes the word permaculture. Yeah. And I don't think there's a lot of places where even conventional people like know the word permaculture, whether they
more and more. I mean, like, did you read Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley
Yes.
Robinson? Okay, so he has a whole chapter on permaculture, and he mentions it several times throughout the books. And that one chapter where he just shines a light on like people like all the different iterations of permaculture around the world and how you're welcome at that table.
I wanted to say, kind of taking a couple steps back is, it can be so overwhelming and despair causing when you think of like, how can I face this massive gargantuan, government, industry, corporate infrastructure, and you can just feel really powerless. But like, I feel powerful when I actually make change locally. Like the impact and these projects I visit, these projects some of them have something to do with the government. Most of them are like people powered projects at a massive scale. And like there is a lot of stuff that can happen to really move the needle of the climate. And, I've found that it's a surprisingly small area of reforestation you need to do to actually alter rainfall patterns. Like it's not out of our hands. Yeah.
Right. And you stack the functions of pollinator pathways, and you stack the functions of watershed restoration, and you stack the functions of reef protection, and you forest at the top. That's one thing that COVID showed us was how quickly the ecosystems rebound. And it's like we're looking at here on Maui, it's like our economy after the fires, there's no economy. It plummeted. Like we depend so much on the tourism economy that we have to diversify our economies. We have to. We have to diversify our economies. We have to have dignified living wage paying jobs that are in service to your own community, your own watershed, your own neighbors, your own county.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the same time, there is the complication that there's a lot of people that live in places that really cannot support those populations. I mean, there's a lot of people like on a big camping trip, basically, where all of their food, their water, and their energy is trucked in, and I can start to list off cities in the, like, Phoenix, Arizona. Well, a lot of stuff in Hawaii, right? The percentage of food coming in, or Las Vegas, or places that just like it cannot naturally support that population. So there's a little bit like sometimes when I hear people getting like strict sort of bioregionalism, which I mean, obviously we do need to maximize production, watershed health within the watersheds, the bioregions, the areas we live. But we also, like, I'm going to visit in Senegal, and I've just been doing my research because I was looking at the landscape we're visiting, and I was looking at the population. Dakar is about a city of 4 million people. And I said, where's all the farming? Like, I'm looking on Google Earth. I'm like, I see farms, but I don't see like massive farming. Well, they import 70% of their food.
Right.
Okay. Where is it? What is it? Wheat? Is it from, I think it's from Poland? Is it from Ukraine? Is it from Russia? Is it, like,
Right.
these are things I'm not sure, but like, we live in such a globalized system right now that it's complicated. We can't just cut off the global system of like food shipment and energy shipment, or we really have, catastrophe.
I agree with that, and we have to scale up. Like, to get to, like, for example, in my neighborhood, if we could grow 5% of the food that we consume for everybody in my neighborhood, that's like up from 0.005, right? So that's huge. And for us to scale jump from there to 10 or 15 or 20%, like, if we had salaried neighborhood permaculturalists in a subdivision, that was their job, in 5 years, these neighborhoods would be full of food. And so it's really, it's a design challenge in that way, but what if you get 100 houses in a neighborhood to each put in $100 a month? Wow, okay, all of a sudden you have salaries for 2 people. And that would be amazing. So looking at the solutions through people need to jump into hyper action at this point, I feel, right? I would say that collectively, those of us that are already working in the realms of climate change and climate adaptation, like these fires, like right down the road from us, like it lights a fire under our collective ass. Like, we're already in motion. We're already like, those are who we hang out with. That's who we talk to. This is the language that we speak. But it's making it, making the gravity of it understood, and then also helping people have super accomplishable, actionable items and ways to participate and shift. So we feel like language is a big part of that, and learning how to approach this with both a humbleness and a stridency at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I am very shocked that people are as complacent as they are. And I don't know what the triggers. I mean, in your case, it was a very obvious trigger of what, figuratively and literally lit a fire under everybody's asses. And I am like waiting for the series of events that really actually lights a fire under the collective, because I mean, it's got to happen.
Well, this is what I've been saying is like, it compounds and intensifies from here. So here we had the fires, and I said to my gang, I'm like, you know what? And all we need now is a storm to take out Long Beach, where most of our stuff is shipped from on the Jones Act, by the way. So we can't even ship it directly to Hawaii because that's ridiculous. So we need to get rid of that. But if Long Beach goes out, our shelves are empty. We import 85–90% of our food overall in the Hawaiian Islands, but we import like 98–90% of staples, like wheats and rice and all that stuff. And so then the storm is like barreling up the coast of, Fernanda. Here comes Fernanda. She's like, woo, Fernanda. She's coming up the coast. And I'm like, okay, there it is. It's on us. And I think that you're right. The collective effect is huge, and it's going to also cause the displacement of a lot of people. And I'm looking forward. I'm going to be interviewing a colleague of mine who's a professor at Lund University, and he also writes the UN disaster report, annual disaster report, and the High Commissioner for Refugees. And we've talked in the past about, climate change, people on the move. And I, at one point, called it, what are you going to do about all the climate change refugees? This was a few years ago. And he said, they're not refugees, because refugees have this definition. like they're fleeing persecution or whatever the definition of a refugee is, a very specific definition. I'm like, I don't care if they're a refugee or whatever you call them, there's going to be a lot of them. And we have to figure out how to absorb those populations on the move. There's some really great work being done, like I think it's Rosemary Morrow. There's a few people that have been doing permaculture design in refugee camps.
Yeah, well, I mean, Natalie Topa has done a lot of work like that in Somalia, and now she works for the World Food Program, the UN. And when we look at all the political tension around the southern border of the U.S., all these people coming north from Honduras, a lot of that is like ecological devastation. When we look at the migration of Africans and people from the Middle East into Europe, all the political tension around that, there's all these big political things. We can break it down to land degradation, watershed collapse, hydrologic collapse, climate change, soil depletion, like this. Yeah. I mean, so it's all tied into, in a way, to like the health of the watershed. And if you have a healthy watershed, you have the shock absorbers that can actually handle the drought or the intensive storm. But if you don't have a healthy watershed, if you don't have stable soil, forested slopes, then when that pulse of heat comes, or that pulse of water comes, or whatever the extreme weather event comes, your ecosystem, your watershed is the shock absorber to that on a very localized level. So, repair of localized landscapes is actually the solution to the refugee crisis, because people aren't going to leave places that are healthy and thriving. And it's also the solution to being resilient against climate extremes.
Right, and it's also land access. I mean, when you look at the lands above Lahaina that used to be a breadfruit forest with lush wetlands, and sure, it was hot and dry, but the watersheds, people, had lo'i, they had taro growing, kalo growing all the way up, and it was legendary for its beauty and its lushness and its greenery and and wetlands, and beach access and canoes, like when the culture was rich and with all of those things. And why do corporations get to keep owning that land if they are going to completely and utterly, one, destroy the land, two, destroy the watershed, three, destroy the reef, kill the culture, and they're not, it's just sitting fallow being a fire hazard. I mean, I don't know how to change land tenure at this stage, but being able to shift these types of fallow agricultural lands back into productive, resilient, syntropic agriculture, passive water harvesting landscapes, we need these fractals of solutions so that we can scale jump from them.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of land is sitting in its lowest common denominator land use, the cheapest, easiest use of the land that can be managed by the fewest amount of people with, whether it's chemical fertilizer input or pesticide or herbicide, and I did that whole, I don't know if you saw the whole video I did on the ahupua'a on Oahu and everything, and seeing, I got a glimpse through staying with the nation of Hawaii and looking at the work that they're doing, restoring their ahupua'a there in Waimanalo. I got a glimpse of the richness, the rich potential of the ahupua'a, and then you go down from there and there's this military base and it's a lot of just kind of unused land. So when you see the incredible system of the traditional Hawaiian people and the terraces and the hyper intensive management of diverse food production, and then you go and you see broad scale sort of semi wasted land, it's exactly, it's what, right?
I remember studying when I was doing my early permaculture trainings and learning over time from different teachers, that there's only a few ecosystems around the world that have endured for thousands of years or 1,000 years or more. And the Hawaiian system is one. One of the other ones is in Europe.
Agro ecosystems, agricultural ecosystems.
Where you don't have to get, a lot of humans, they migrate. So they move to a new place and then they completely rape all the resources and then they just move on, and then they settle in the next place, right? So patterns of migration. But the enduring ones is one from Hawaii, the ahupua'a, the moku system. And then there's the one in Spain, they call it the cork and pork, right? So they had the pigs and the
Dehisa system.
The nuts, right? And so that's an enduring system. It is so hard to see the Republican candidates get on stage and every single one of them is a climate denier.
Yeah, like, well, it's interesting because I've heard analysis of that, and people are like, actually, when you poll the population, I mean, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and everybody, like, that is the prevailing belief by the majority of the population is that climate change is happening, because you can't tell someone who's experiencing 115-degree record heat in Oklahoma that like really remembers that it's never gotten that hot before. You can't tell them like, no, everything's cool. I mean, that's all fine when you're sitting in your little bubble watching TV, but then you go outside and you're like, actually, things are kind of scary and different.
My family lives in Italy. They live in northern Italy, and it is so hot right now. It is so hot right now. They can't even go outside. And my sister was telling me that it's quiet. Like, where are the animals and where are the insects and where are the birds and where are the noises? She's like, it's just everything is seared. And it's just waiting for one matchstick, one cigarette butt out the window, and Italy's on fire. And last summer, the Po River ran backwards. Like, the key irrigation source for northern Italy ran backwards, and brackish water was in the river, and you can't irrigate your crops with that, right? So when I talk about the compounding and intensifying of climate reality, game on. So like our old friend Toby Hemingway, he used to talk about, in the peak moment of what's going on, peak oil, peak water, peak population, right? We had this little grace period. We were up here watching the energy ascent culture, and here we are. He said, well, there's this window of time for us to make change. And I feel like it's an aperture at this point. Like, it feels small. But you know what? Through the singularity, like, what happens? And so,
but at the same time, I've got to say, I mean, especially some of these projects like the Pani Foundation, where we're talking about like 16 million people working on watershed restoration in a region.
That's in
yeah,
India?
in India. That's
Wow.
what I consider like the biggest. I say permaculture project, but they don't say permaculture project there. It's the water cup competition, which is a competition between villages to which village can install the most amount of water harvesting structures in a 45-day period. It's sponsored by Bollywood star Amir Khan, who's like mega star and everything. They have all this corporate like donation, so they have big prize money. And they literally, I mean, I've documented this, and these are the videos I'm currently putting out right now on my YouTube channel. I mean, they've literally fixed the water problems of thousands of villages. Of like in the neighborhood of 8,000 villages participated in their project, and in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 2,000 villages they would consider completely fix their water problems, and now are moving on to maximizing their farm yields with organic methods. So I'm just saying that, I mean, I personally have witnessed places that have literally in a very short period of time shifted their entire reality, literally from poverty, from like water depletion, tanker trucks for their water supply, people leaving and going to live in slums and migrating as farm workers, to people that are literally like rich. Like, they've literally become rich and they have abundant water. They have multiple cropping periods a year. They're investing in the infrastructure of their villages. The kids are suddenly like able to go to college. I mean, this is a very rapid transformation, all because of watershed scale water harvesting and replenishing their aquifers, so.
Leadership. Where's the leadership in the United States? This is the challenge for me. I think that this spring, so spring 2023, I was presencing that it's going to be the summer of hell in Europe. I didn't think it would be on Maui. We can grow food year round and but okay. So, but Europe is in an intense drought and fire moment. Like, it's really, really intense. And so there's a lot of organizations and people and individuals stepping up to contribute to the currency that we need, the flow that we need to fund these projects. This is a pick a project, pick people that you like, fund them, fund permaculturalists, fund syntropic agriculture, fund your watershed coalition. This is
Fund me.
Show, like, we have fund you, fund me, like fund Growers Magazine, fund Abundant Earth Foundation. Here we are. Like, I would like to challenge people to, whether it's I'm picking the number 13 because it's just a nice girly number, right? So like if you could give 13% of your income or 13% of your time or whatever combination of income and time to the planet, to these projects, to these vital projects, and teaching people these skills, like, we would be off to an amazing start. My collaborator is the Abundant Earth Foundation. They have several projects around the world, but we support all kinds of projects. And that's our goal, is to shine a light on people that are working on solutions and inspire people, inspire our audience, inspire you, our audience, to take part in change. You can all take permaculture design courses. How many students have you put through your MOOC? And what is a MOOC?
I mean, we had the massive open online course run for a couple of years. We had 45,000 people go through that course. As far as my like online permaculture design course, we've had thousands of people go through that. My YouTube, I have almost 30 million views on my YouTube channel, and that's basically just like public education. I have people from around the world. We're now dubbing it into Spanish. Now my Spanish language channel is suddenly starting to get a lot of views as well. So I mean, people are super hungry for this information, and people are just it's a grassroots dissemination. I'm all about just like free grassroots dissemination of information. We're past the point where we can hold this information behind a sort of paywall, and I mean, there's some practicality to it. If you're gonna take someone's time as an instructor and all the stuff we do with our online course, then that has to work financially. But like, my personal goal, using the surplus of my program at Oregon State University, is to put free information out as easily digestible to the masses. And I'm hoping that I mean, it seems like there's some triggering going on from that, however small. But the whole thing is, like you said, the team, the swarm, the flock. Like, we are a flock, we are a swarm. And if the swarm each person can kind of do their particular thing, but we collaborate, communicate, and hopefully there's some sort of like hive mind that we can get things done that you can't do in a top-down power dynamic, basically.
Right, and that's absolutely correct. Like, the need for decentralization across the spectrum of food, power, transport, all of that stuff is really important now. So we've gone through this sort of failed experiment in massive centralization of systems, and we need to get back to more bioregionalism that can scale. And you know what? People in Seattle are always going to drink coffee. There will always be trade. There will always be movement of people and goods around the planet. No doubt about that. But we need to do it in a Pono way. We need to do it in a way that doesn't create the great Pacific fucking gyre. Like, it's time. It's like game on for shift. And I really want to let people know that there's this huge network around the world that's engaged in shift. They do everything from grow backyard gardens to design hydrological systems for cities that are sustainable, to do the modeling for climate change. One of the cool projects I'm learning about now is people who are anticipating the climate change of 5, 10, and 20 years, and then convincing their clients or convincing their projects, like your Great Green Wall, to put 10% of it in crops that you're anticipating are going to be that much hotter or that much wetter or that much whatever, more windier, so that that resilience is starting to be built in. And yes, it's an experimental edge, but we really need that right now.
Yeah. Well, we say diversity is resilience, So, I mean, also, wait, one sec. How much time do we have? Because I have a couple tangents I would like to go into, but I'm just not sure if we're like...
Go. Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so, at the same time where I live, the average temperature is going up, the nighttime temperatures are going up, the extreme heat spikes are going up. But at the same time, with the instability of the jet stream, there's also more erratic cold events with, polar vortexes coming down. So it's like there's the double-edged sword of, okay, so you want to move into hotter crops, but you also may have these spikes of cold temperatures. So it's not it's not a linear raise in temperature. Like you said, it's not climate. It's not, no one's saying like global warming anywhere. I mean, there's a, no one location is just warming, I guess. It's like
Right.
the spikes and stuff like that. I did want to say, one interesting thing, you're talking about, oh, there's always going to be this like international trade. And I don't know if you've looked at the work of this guy, Peter Zine. He wrote a book called The End of the World is Just the Beginning. I don't agree with a lot of his like political views, but he lays out this really pretty convincing argument for the end of globalization, that we are, based on a lot of different things, based on geography, based on the demographic collapse of industrialized countries, and that basically we're going to go from globalization to regionalism. And in a regional world, Hawaii, for example, may be more connected to the other islands, Polynesian islands, basically, than it is to the US, and I mean, there definitely could be, with just the change, with like us reaching all these tipping points in resource availability. And, his argument is that like the seas are not going to be safe for mass global shipping in the future, right? That like everything's been safe since World War II, and it's a whole long story. But I mean, and you'd have to read it yourself and see if you're convinced by it. But I'm looking at a world where we're not going to have everything produced anywhere moving all over, and one chip from Taiwan, the superconductors there, that's coming from some other parts from China and then is being assembled in Malaysia and coming, all this stuff, and then coming to the US. Like those days are numbered as far as I'm concerned. And so even if it's not like bioregional, like Oregon and, Cascadia is, I don't believe, going to be, its own little world that doesn't experience trade with other people, but it definitely could be like regional. I mean, it could be that North America is primarily doing most of its trade within the North American continent, because the transport in that area is going to be more feasible than what we have right now is goods hopscotching all over the planet back and forth.
Agreed. I mean, and I don't want to end the conversation on the ills of globalism, because there's so many that we could kvetch about that forever. But what I do want to share with people is that I believe that the shift is on. The climate reality is here. It's not going away. It's going to get worse. What are you doing? How are you participating in change? Are you, we have to give people inspiration and hope and education and opportunity to participate.
My little like positive note on the whole thing is that from what I have seen, and when we look at history, when people become of a like mind, and when we really harmonize our intentions, it's almost inconceivable what we could accomplish if we were actually focused on what we need to be focused on for the survival of our species, the thriving of nature, and the thriving of the planet. I mean, the solutions have been demonstrated. That's kind of my work, is showing, like, look at all the solutions that are demonstrated all over the place. That's not the obstacle. The obstacle is just people getting together, focusing, figuring out what to do, and doing it instead of fighting each other, wasting our time in division. So I mean, like, we can do it. Anybody listening, like, how can you harmonize with your friends, neighbors, communities, people you meet online? How can you harmonize and actually be part of the shift towards the goodness? What else are you going to do?
I think it's a really good message. I really want people to feel empowered. I want people to also know it's pretty amazing what you can do in a short amount of time. Thank you, Andrew. I can't say how much I appreciate the work that you do in the world and the difference that you make and the people that you inspire. You've inspired me for many, many years.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling me up. I always like, if I look at my phone, it's like Jenny Pell. I'm like, yes, I love talking to you, hearing what you're up to. And so thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on the show today. I want to let the audience know, people that are listening and watching, that if you want to learn more about Andrew's projects in Senegal, at Oregon State University, really all over the world, in India, you can see in the links below, and you can go to growersmagazine.com for all those details. Also, can you tell us again the name of the organization at the Great Green Wall if people want to donate to that project?
Yeah, Great Green Wall Frontline. So there's another organization I just heard of, but Neil Spackman is on the board of directors. So Great Green Wall Frontline is a like a really like native indigenous based organization of community based project where the organizations I'm visiting are actually not based in Senegal. They have big organizations in Senegal, but one of them is based in the US, so they're getting a lot of their donations are coming in through the US kind of thing. And then I'm also going to see the United Nations World Food Program, and I'm going to look at their Great Green Wall projects, which I'm imagining are going to be very different from the more like food forest based ones from Trees for Future. So that'll be interesting. And I'll probably do about maybe 3 or 4 episodes on my YouTube channel on the ground at the Great Green Wall of Africa.
Right on. Yeah. All right, change is afoot. All right, thank you, Andrew. See you next time. And thanks, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Climate Reality Show.